We're still in the beta for Battlefield 6, but I figure I had enough information to go on to provide a semi-decent guide to help you with tanking. I'll put one out in future when sufficient changes are made to the game, but for now, this should be good enough for most players to drastically increase their capabilities in armoured vehicles. BF6 currently has the M1A2 and the infantry fighting vehicle. You'll utilise them essentially in the same fashion, but the IFE feels like it's better and the ammunition lasts for a lot longer. Speaking of which, when you run out of ammo on both vehicles, you'll reload a little bit gradually, so don't be afraid to blow your load and then play more passively and selectively when you're relying on the resupply. On both vehicles, you'll want to take advantage of splash damage as your primary approach to getting kills. You can hit infantry directly, but aiming for the floor and the walls is a much more effective strategy. The IFE also has localized UAV, which makes it absurdly strong when you're pushing up and capping flags, although in general, this isn't something you'll be doing on a regular basis. The gunner seat on the tank racks up way more kills than the main seat. It has infinite ammo, so you're incentivized to left click as much as you can. Additionally, spam spot constantly. Having enemy locations is incredibly powerful for everyone on your team, so the more you spot enemies you're shooting at, the better. In the clips playing now, you'll see that I'm able to take advantage of spots to kill enemies through multiple particle effects, explosions, and so on. I can't see them on the screen, but spotting allows me to track their location and take them down. If you take a hit or two, jump out and start repairing. Note that you exit the vehicle in the direction that you are facing, so turn your camera around before you get out to avoid splash damage from other vehicles and to keep yourself alive. In my experience, a good driver and gunner combo can rack up 50 to 100 kills per game, with the gunner typically getting more frags than the driver. Although aiming and micro play do matter for tanking, it pales in comparison to your macro decision making. The position of your tank on the map and the way you angle your vehicle against objects is the most important part of your job. Unlike other games and what you might expect from real-world combat, tanks are best utilised behind a line of troops, peppering chokeholds and corners where enemies are likely to be. The problem with frontlining is multifaceted. Firstly, an indeterminate number of enemies could be near you, and as a result, you might cop way more attention and damage than you otherwise would. If you are the only immediate obstacle between point A and point B, expect to be spotted and all resources utilised to thwart your existence. Additionally, the further into enemy territory you are, the greater the likelihood that you'll have to spin your turret every which way in order to try and kill enemies. This reduces your effectiveness and makes you way more vulnerable than a comparative situation where your attention is focused on just a very small viewing angle. BF6 is also way more cluttered with effects and distracting on-screen elements that make it more visually modern, but at the cost of clarity and coherence. This means we have to play smarter than in a title such as BF2, and we really have to approach the games with macro in mind. As a general rule, we don't want to invest a lot of our effort and time into capturing flags closest to the enemy's headquarters. These are difficult to hold onto for an extended period and are often recaptured, making them less preferable as a point to contend. Points worth capturing and providing firepower for are also map specific. Some are quite difficult for tanks to approach and utilise, so be very analytical and be sure why you're driving to a specific location and understand what your overall goal is. As an example, Iberian's Assault B control point is awful for tanks to siege and interact with. There are many corridors and levels that people can attack you from. Conversely, Iberian's E and D flags for the eastern side are much easier to take and control. I tend to prioritise open regions and areas with limited exposure. The edge of the map really assists with this. Don't feel compelled to push forward either, especially when you control a majority of the points. Being defensive is a good strategy when you are ahead. I especially like defensive positioning near the repair stations. These don't make you immortal, but it's an awesome strategic resource to have. Think about the angle of your tank and where you can quickly relocate to if you're taking damage. This is often situational, but the edge of buildings, buses, and rocks are all useful to quickly create a barrier between you and the threat. Threat reduction isn't just for yourself either. It allows engineers to jump out and repair without the risk of death. In terms of micro, rolling your tank backwards and forwards rhythmically reduces the odds that you get hit with an RPG, so I do recommend doing this. It also provides some momentum that might be useful if your situation quickly changes. Quite a big threat is your own team. For whatever reason, people can just spawn on your tank even if they're not in your squad. And if you're in a duo, that can mean someone jumps into the gunner seat who might not be switched on or equipped with a wrench. I've even had my tank stolen by other players who spawned on me mid-repair, only to then suicide run into the enemy. Don't do this, you look incredibly foolish. If the enemy tank has an engineer and your team has no RPGs aimed towards them, it's basically a stalemate, and you shouldn't worry too much about prioritizing the destruction of the other tank. You'll just waste a minute hammering against a brick wall, and you're far better off picking at the infantry nearby instead. You'll want to gauge the potential you have for killing an enemy's tank by considering how many friendlies you have in proximity to it. C4 and RPGs heavily favour you, and even getting a kill on the engineer behind the tank essentially guarantees that you'll win the exchange. Rear and side impacts do more damage with the anti-vehicle projectile than a frontal hit, so I'd always recommend back shots when that's an option. You might also find opportune angles to splash damage the repairing engineers with your main cannon if you're in the IFE, so keep that in mind. It does feel questionable to deliberately avoid engaging with the enemy tank, but if your objective is to win and or rack up kills, there are going to be times when it's just not a priority. If you're doing a better job of controlling the battlefield than the opposition's tank is, there's no urgency in destroying it. Assuming your goal is to win and to rack up a bunch of kills while doing so, your role in the tank is to disrupt the enemy as much as possible and to avoid death to the absolute best of your ability. Tanks take a while to respawn. You're not guaranteed to get it when it does spawn, and when you do, you still have to spend time traveling to wherever the action is. Disrupting the enemy is achieved via kills, but it's also achieved by cutting off pathways and drawing attention and aggression. If enemies are spawning with AT kits, they're not able to make use of other secondary tools such as paddles, respawn beacons, and so on. This reduces their effectiveness outside of trying to kill you, and by proxy, increases your team's ability to kill them and capture flags. Remember that if enemies are focusing on you, this means they're not focusing on your allies, allowing for flanks and stacking the odds greatly in your favour. If you die, you lose the ability to draw aggro and disrupt enemies, especially via kills, which is why you want to avoid it as much as possible. You also act as a mobile spawn point, which does provide you with passive support pretty much non-stop. You'll slowly learn when aggressive pushes are warranted and when defensive gameplay is required, but as a general rule of thumb, go to where your allies are and sit slightly behind them. This makes it harder for you to be killed, and while it does have a marginal impact on your killing potential in a vacuum, you'll yield more in the long term by going with this approach. Do not get cucked into thinking you need to storm flags or be front and center. Tanks are very vulnerable in BF6, and irrational approaches to gameplay won't result in great scores or great win rates. Play smart, position as optimally as possible, and adapt to the circumstances you find yourself in. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more BF6 content in future.